All right. Good morning, Brian. How are you going?
Morning, Beau. I'm really well. Thank you for asking. I hope you are too.
I'm fantastic, and I appreciate you taking the time to have 5 minutes with a fellow. Now, as I've said before in the introduction, it will be longer than 5 minutes because your career has spanned over nearly 5 decades, and you have achieved a hell of a lot. So I'm going to throw a lot of the questions to you and just be here and listen. And what people don't understand or may not know is that you and I met probably about 9 months ago.
Yep.
And ever since then, I class you as a mentor to me, and I am very appreciative of the time that you've allowed me in your life and given me your stories. So the first thing that I want to ask you is your career and your journey. You've actually changed the industry. You've had so many moments coming through, and I've seen some of the videos and I've seen some of the reports, and we'll discuss them later. But from your perspective, what's been some of the greatest moments or achievements that you've had?
Well, I think being recognised with the award of becoming an officer in the Order of Australia has to be a great highlight. And that was in great part as a result of my involvement with the industry. But that was important, not just for me, but because of what it indicated for a lot of other people. People like the people I worked with and for in IBM, who allowed me to get involved in things that were broader than just the computer industry and the priorities of the IBM company. And I'm really grateful for that, and I feel good about it because it happened really 10 years after I came to Australia for the first time ever. And being allowed to make that kind of contribution over that period of time was fantastic for me.
So we're going to get to the Fin report, and we're going to get through how you changed the education sector and how you brought the industry together with the education sector. But I want to go back to where it all started. You started in the late 1950s in the industry. How did you fall into it? What made you decide that IBM was a company that you wanted to work with, or what was the path that you took?
Well, I spent 2 years in the army at that time in the UK, which is where I grew up. You had to do 2 years with what was called national service. And when I came out of the army, I wondered what I really ought to do. Prior to joining the army, I'd been an accounting clerk in a manufacturing company, and I really didn't want to go back to doing that. During my time in the army, I became involved in ammunition disposal and bomb disposal, and the thoughts of going back to an accounting career sitting behind a desk were not really very appealing. So I cast around for things to do, and I saw a job advert for a company called IBM. I applied and got the job, joined IBM, and from my point of view, I never looked back from that point on. And the great turning point in my life was when I joined the IBM company in 1959.
What was your first role in IBM?
Well, that was in the days of punch card accounting machines. So I was what's called a system service representative. So when the sales representative had sold a new installation, I went in and prepared all the control panels as they were then, so that the applications could be installed and could begin to operate. So it was very much a start at the bottom job, which is typical of the way IBM recruits people. I did that for a couple of years and then became a salesman and moved on from there in various jobs throughout my career in the company. So it was an interesting starting point. I learned a lot. I worked with a lot of different companies, a lot of very good people, and it was quite challenging work. However, in 1959, the year I joined, a little bit later, IBM introduced the 1401 computer. IBM always chose romantic names for its products, the 1401 being probably the least romantic, but close. And that changed the complexion of the industry. Gone were the days of punch card accounting machines, and we were into the era of computers. And I got involved in that from an IBM point of view, right from the very start of that period. And that was great experience.
You were pivotal in the changes. You were with IBM for 35 years.
Yeah.
and you reached the pinnacle. You were, and what people may not know, you were the CEO in Australia for IBM, and then the chair of IBM in Australia. So you started as essentially a graduate and made it all the way to the top. It doesn't happen too often these days. A lot of people are not staying in jobs for many years. They're a couple of years and they're moving around. Something you've said to me before was IBM always gave you opportunities to learn and to move jobs. So I'm fascinated when you tell me your stories about how you've moved countries and how you've moved jobs. Just sort of give us some of that time frame and some of the experiences that you've had through that 35-year career at IBM.
Well, typically in my period, throughout the period I was with IBM, the company took the view that the technologies were changing so quickly that every individual in the company would have to be retrained about every 2 to 4 years. And that really happened throughout my career. So every couple of years you got a different job, often in a different geography, not always between countries, but at least I moved, for example, from Newcastle in the northeast of England to London as my first major job move. And then I moved back from London to Newcastle to become the branch manager in Newcastle. And then I moved back to London to run the marketing organization. And then in 1973, I moved to the United States and worked in IBM Federal Systems Division in Houston, Texas. And the job I did there, having run the marketing organization in the UK, was totally different. I was the systems manager for a major software development project that was to automate 2 oil refineries for the Exxon Corporation, one refinery in Canada and one in Antwerp in Belgium. And I had a team, I suppose, of about over 100 programmers. We had about a dozen project engineers, process control engineers, really, from Exxon, some from Exxon in the US and some from Exxon in Europe, and a bunch of IBM people who knew the petroleum industry from probably about 7 to 10 different countries in the world. And we had this job of automating 2 disparate oil refineries in different parts of the world, and what was really a fairly technical job, having been in more of a supervisory and managerial job, which is what I had when I left the UK. At the end of that project, my boss asked what I planned to do. He was a man called Ralph Pfeiffer, and he was running the IBM business in the Americas and in the Far East. And I said, well, I suppose I ought to go back to the UK. And he said, well, why don't you join the Americas Far East Corporation? So I said I would. And he said then, well, look, before you settle down in the US, I'd really like you to go to India. We have some serious issues that we need to resolve with the Indian government. And I'd like you to go there to, it'll take a couple of years, and live in Delhi. And while you're there, you might look after the business interests we have in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, as well as India, which was the major part of the business in that part of the world. So I did that for a couple of years. We were not able to come to a really satisfactory solution with the government of India at that time. I then moved on and ran the business in the whole of the Far East, with the exception of Japan, which I did for 3 years. And then fortunately, I moved to Australia and spent the rest of my career in Australia, although that wasn't the intention at the beginning. So I think I was extremely fortunate in having the opportunities that I had, and especially to end up in India, where my family still live. And Australia, like IBM, has been very kind to me and to my family, and I'm grateful for it.
So I'd like to explore that a little bit too. I mean, the opportunities were there, but you took the opportunities. So if there's any lessons for emerging sort of leaders coming through, or even graduates coming through, what's some of the things that you would say to them when the opportunity presents itself?
Well, listen, I'm a real believer in trusting my own instincts and not shilly-shallying around. A little vignette of that. When my boss, Ralph Pfeiffer, suggested I go to India, he'd met my wife on a couple of occasions. We were then living in Houston, and Ralph and I were having this conversation in his office in New York. And I said, well, look, that's a really interesting prospect. I'd really love to do it, but I really would like to talk to Ivy before I give you, a final decision. And he said, oh, I understand that. Is she at home? And I said, oh, I'm sure she is. And he said, well, there's the phone. Give her a call. So I did, and she was at home, and she said, if that's what you'd like to do, let's do it. So I really am a firm believer in trusting your instincts, trusting the people in whom you have put your trust. And if it looks good and if it feels good, it probably is good. So get on with it, do it. Don't agonize, don't consider ifs and buts, just get on with it and make it happen. And I've tried to adopt that attitude really throughout. It's served me well, and I have no regrets at having done so.
Was there any time ever that you ever had any self-doubt? I mean, you were being thrown around into different countries through IBM to fix up the problems, and you had a different career. Did self-doubt ever come in? Because we hear that now with people coming through the industry about self-doubt or about not being able to compete. So, from your perspective, how did you overcome some of that?
Well, it's hard to say, Beau, but it is a question of trust in your instincts. Did I have doubts about individual decisions? Always. I mean, I've never approached anything thinking that whatever I decide is absolutely the right way and the only way and the best way. So have I agonized over decisions having made them? Well, yeah, worry about them because the implications are often very serious indeed. But has it stopped me from pursuing them and trying hard to make them work and eventually, in almost all cases, succeeding? The answer is no, it's never stopped me. So have I had doubts? Oh, individually, yeah. But at the end of the day, you make a decision, you stick with it, and you try to make it work. So I find it difficult to identify with people who have self-doubts over a long and extended period of time. I think you have to come to terms with where you are and who you are and what you set out to do and just get on with it and make it happen.
How important through the time, and we've spoken about this, was the family and the family support and making sure the family were comfortable with the decisions that you made as a group, and also at the end of the day, your kids are special kids, and they've lived in multiple countries, but they've exceeded and they've excelled. The ability of taking your kids along that journey, has that shaped their future, in your opinion?
Oh, undoubtedly. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind at all that it has. And I have 5 children, and they're all very important to me. We are still close, obviously, to one another. One of my sons lives in the UK. 3 of the other boys live in New South Wales, and my daughter lives here in Queensland, not far from me. Their upbringing was very much in the hands of my wife, Ivy, who passed away about 2 years ago. But Ivy was the one who really made us a family. I traveled a great deal, especially when I was living in Delhi and latterly living in Hong Kong and even living in Australia. Typically during those periods, I would be away from home for pretty well 4 days out of every week. The weekends were always special, and it was very rare for me not to be home on the weekends. But Ivy was the one who knitted the family together and made sure that we were a family. And I know the boys feel that as well, notwithstanding the fact that as their dad, I'm very close to them. But we have always pulled together as a family and still do.
And look, I know that with the chats that we've had, how close your family are to you and how proud you are of the family. But I think that a lot of that reflection is the opportunities that they had as a family going through, and sort of the work ethic that you put in with the family that's there. Just want to sort of fast forward a little bit, skip a couple of the 70s, 80s and 90s, and we'll get up to the 90s. You sent me a video a couple of months ago of one of our prime ministers mentioning you in very favourable terms about some work that you've done. So without me taking some of that glory, I want to throw it over to you. And can you explain sort of that period and how you got involved in the education sector and the change that you're able to bring in there and that is still living today?
Well, you know, IBM always believed that senior people in the company should play an active part in the society of which we're part, and that they should try to make a contribution. And it was expected of people in my job to participate in the community at large. That was always understood in the IBM company, that you would do that, but in a way that was not politicized. And for that reason, because it had relevance as well, I got involved in education, mainly in an institutional sense through the Business Council of Australia, which I was a member of. And during that time, I was asked if I would be the chairman of a group that was set up by the Australian Education Commission, the AEC. That's made up of all of the state and the federal ministers of education, and on their behalf to do a review of what was called post-compulsory education, in other words, years 11 and 12. And as we looked into that, it was obvious that the education system at that time, years 11 and 12, were really designed to get people prepared to enter university. Now, many people didn't want to do that, and it was not the time in their life when they were equipped to do it. And therefore, what you had were people who were leaving school at the end of year 10, most of whom went on to get a technical education in organizations like TAFE, but they tended to miss out on additional education in the fields of English language, science, technology, and focus only on the trade skill they were studying for. That seemed to me to be not a great idea. And the thrust of the report that we did was to say that there should be opportunity in years 11 and 12 for people who stay on those years, and we were advocating that there should be more people who did that they should have an opportunity to learn a skill, a trade skill if need be, but also to continue their education in subjects like English language, literature, physics, chemistry, and so on. So that was really the thrust. And as a result of that, the Hawke government set up an organization called the Australian National Training Authority, ANTA as it was called, and I was the chairman of that for the first 3 years of its existence. And the whole focus was to try and continue education in the basics of people who were also at the same time learning trade skills. So it was more complicated than that, but in net terms, that's what it set out to do. And for many years it did that. I think it didn't go as far as I had hoped and many others had hoped, but it did make some significant progress for young people who were coming through the education system.
So you've actually changed thousands of lives. I mean, let's not sugarcoat this. The effort that you put in and the change that you put in is a legacy that's still in place now, 20 odd years later, 25 years later, and it's still running. So people coming through sort of those programs because of the changes that you put in have got jobs, but have also been very successful in their career. You brought industry back into education. You created that alignment. One of the parts of that report that I read at the start, which was there was 30,000 job shortage, skilled job shortage in the very near term. I've read that in another report just very recently, the ACS Digital Pulse report is talking about the job skill shortage. So we still haven't learnt and we still haven't got to the level that we need to ensure that we have parity on skills and jobs that are there. what would your message be right now? You were the titan in the industry. You led the industry in the 90s and 2000s. And what would your message be to the leaders now to start shaping the future the same way that you did?
Yeah, well, I think it's all too easy to sit back and criticize the education system or the government of the day for not delivering to business the kinds of people that they want to have join. But really, I think if that's a reasonable feeling, then business and industry needs to get up and do something about it. And that's what I attempted to do through the Business Council of Australia and through the cooperative education degrees that were initiated in 4 universities. And those degree programs had students spending a fixed period of time under the direction of the educators, learning about how businesses operate. And I think that made a fundamental difference to the quality of the graduates and their suitability for business that exited those programs, and those programs are still running. Obviously changed because of the change in technology, but pretty much following the same principles and same precepts. Those degree programs became very attractive to many, many young people, in part because the businesses also provided, I think initially it was $8,000 per year per student to help them through their degree program, financially help them. And of course, as well, having the opportunity to work in prestigious companies for fixed periods of time, you don't have to be a genius to work it out, but that might be an excellent entree to getting a good job with those companies at the end of the degree program. So the people we were able to attract were really top quality young people. And it was and still is a very, very good degree program. And I think it delivers the kinds of students that businesses are looking for. So the underlying message is, if you don't like what's happening in the system today, then do something about it, get involved, and change the system. And to expect educators to deliver highly suitable students as employees who are familiar with business without them having the involvement in business, I don't know how you think that will ever work. You have to have business involved, and business needs to take a leadership position in making that happen.
And I'd probably add one more thing. There's no use reinventing the wheel when it's already been done.
Well, I think that's true. Yeah.
If the more I read the Fin report and the more I read the literature behind that, we're in the same situation now. We haven't solved the issue, but we know that there is what you've put in place. We can bring back in. We can expand it. We can get the right skills behind it.
We certainly can, Beau, and I'm sure there are people in the ACS, in ACS today, who have enough influence to be able to sponsor students, to help change the course of the education system as it stands today, if it isn't satisfactory. And that's really how those degree programs got started. It's because a number of vice chancellors wanted to have change, wanted to get closer to business, and a number of people who were computer professionals running organizations like the IT departments in, let's say, Coles-Myer, the ANZ Bank, Westpac, and so on. The people running those organizations were sufficiently sensible and public spirited that they decided they would spend that money. It didn't go to the boards of directors. $8,000 per student, if you take 4 students, it wasn't a hell of a lot of money even then. And that decision was left to the professionals who were running the IT departments. And we have many of those people today in the ACS who could, and maybe they are, I don't know, could exercise the same kind of influence as the people did in the 80s when those programs first started.
And completely agree, and I think it's up to the industry to change the future, not rely on a single entity or a single sector. So I'm going to take it down a little bit more. We've both got kids, and we've both talked about our kids previously, and mine are a little bit younger than yours, but your grandkids are coming through now. How do we encourage the generation coming through now to take up the career in tech or digital or whatever the industry is going to be called in the future? How do we move them towards that space?
Well, I think in part it's to do with differentiation. What is it that the industry offers, and what is it that it offers to young people as they complete their education to attract them to the computer industry or IT in general, and make it a highly desirable occupation? The cooperative education programs that I talked about before were just that. They were differentiated. They offered students an opportunity to complete a degree program, part of which would be in prestigious Australian companies. They also had, at that time, $8,000 a year, which, to my knowledge, no other degree programs in Australia were giving at that time. So there were a couple of great attractions to attract the brightest and the most committed to join those degree programs. I think we have to do, why not just do the same thing again? Why, as you said before, why reinvent the wheel? It works, it does attract good people, we know that. So I think differentiation is really important in attracting young people to follow one path rather than another. And I just wonder if we're doing enough of it today in our industry to make that happen still.
So then I'll sort of move away. The industry as a whole, what do you see some of the biggest challenges in the industry right now?
I think the social challenges are really quite significant. We live in different times. I'm not sure that I'm active enough in business to really understand the implications of the challenges we face. But I think at the end of the day, during the time I spent as a company director, long having left IBM, the problems didn't change that much. And in almost all cases, it's all about people. It's all about the quality of the people you have, the way you motivate them, the way you manage them, the way you reward them, the example you set for them, the ethical standards, all of those. I don't think any of that's changed. But maybe I'm just getting too old and can't change myself. But I think it's pretty much the same. It's all about people, and it's all about the way we treat them and the example we set and the public stand we take on important matters. And I don't mean political matters.
Yep. And that hasn't changed over your long career. It's all been about people. Technology does change, but the people are the power behind that. I mean, we've discussed that before, and you've led me down certain paths with some of the discussions that we've had. So one of the areas you've had the most successful career, I've sort of, your CV and everything will be up, and all the stuff that you've achieved will be a part of this podcast. But just reading it, I think there's about 15 or 18 different chairman, director, or positions that you've had since leaving IBM, and since sort of that time period that's there. A lot of the questions get asked is from a leader in technologies, from CIO, CDO, or any of that sort of space. How do they move from that position to a board position or an executive position? You've done it all. So if you've got any advice for the career jump from leader within a tech field to a leader within a business field, what would you give to them?
I think you have to participate in the business community as a whole, and not just in the bit that is obvious and relevant to your particular job. So, for example, I was a long-time member of the Business Council of Australia, which at that time had about 100 of Australia's largest companies. I was fortunate in IBM that IBM's a big ticket purchase, so I was then, as you well know. And so I got to meet, as customers, the top people in most of the big organizations in Australia. And that kind of exposure was always very helpful. You got to know these people on a business basis, and they got to form an opinion of you and whether you were trustworthy and whether you were capable. And I would never refuse an invitation to speak or to attend functions, so you have to put the effort in. And I also believe that wherever there's an opportunity to work for the government on a no-charge basis, for example, by being a member of a board of directors of a public entity, or participating in committee work, some of which is really quite tedious and time-consuming, you've got to do it. You've got to play the part that you're expected to play. And over a period of time, people get to know you. They get to make their own mind up about you. And in my case, that's how I was fortunate enough to become a director of a lot of different companies. I was also helped by the fact that the board of directors of IBM, a group of very prominent and eminent people, got to know me over the years and were able to speak for me if and when opportunities came up to be a director after I'd left IBM. And there's no doubt in my mind that that was extremely helpful and influential in me securing the jobs that I secured after I left the company. So those are just some observations. I don't think there's any magic formula. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of, I'll do it because you've asked me to do it. After I retired, I found that for the first 6 months, I was much more busy than I had been when I worked for IBM. you get to be asked to do a lot of work for charity, which I did, but there has to be a limit to it, because I soon figured out that in some respects you don't have to be very good. You're just incredibly cheap. So you get lots of invitations when you work for nothing. And while you have to do some of that, I think that there is a difference between working for nothing and putting back and doing that, but also working for a livelihood, if that's what you need to do, and I certainly did. You have to inject some balance into that which you do because it's important to do it and you do it for free, and that which you do because you need to do it because you need to earn a living. So there is a need for some balance there.
Now, I've sort of, if we go through the positions after you left IBM, so Chairman, City Power, Chairman, Director of PowerTel, Director of Southcorp, Sydney Ports, AXA, Vita Group. I mean, you go through the list. It's a massive list. It's is there any one or two of those particularly that your background in IBM, your technical background, suited coming into the board, where a board was not technically proficient or could understand sort of what you brought into that? You know, so the question, I suppose, coming to, how did you bring your expertise, which is innovation and digital and technical, into boards that may not have understood it? How did you use your influence?
Well, I think it's really a question of being involved when you're asked to be involved rather than intruding on it. It's hard, in my judgment, it's hard, if not impossible, for a company director to change the direction of a company in terms of its ethos and the way that it operates. It just doesn't work like that. But in all of the organizations I worked for, I found the people who were the professionals in their areas were just that. They were professional. They were very capable. And I felt that my role there was much more because of the experience I'd had of living and working in different countries, and in being involved in, yes, in technology as my base level of understanding, but having a good understanding of what works when you are in management generally, and what doesn't work. So I never felt I was there in any of those organizations primarily because of any technical experience or expertise that I had. I really never felt like that, and I don't think it operated like that. I was there because of the general background and knowledge that I had, rather than any specific area of expertise.
And that's where I was sort of rounding it out to. Once you get to a certain level, the ability of bringing technology within the rest of the business is more important than the technology itself. So understanding how technology integrates, and then you've moved through the food chain all the way to the chair of many companies, but understanding how businesses operate and how technology can bring the advantage to that business. And you've said it over and over again to me about the skills that you've learned, every job that you've taken through, the different skills, and every country that you've taken, and it's an example of who you are and the influence that you have, but also the legacy that you leave behind. One of the stories that I shared with you last time we had a chat, which was about 25 years ago, you sat next to a friend of mine who was a salesman at IBM. And if you remember me sharing the story, how just an interaction that you had with him it changed his career, made his day, but he remembers it 30 years down the track, that a simple interaction from Brian Finn changed his career projection and his career path. And this person, I won't name him, he's retired now, but your interactions actually change a lot, and you leave a lot behind, the legacies and the people that you touched going through. So from my perspective, the more that you are involved in the ACS and the more that you're involved in the industry, the better the industry's been for it, and you've left a big legacy behind. So thank you. I enjoy our catch-ups every month that we have, but also I want to leave you with sort of the last sort of point. The legacy that you leave behind, what are you most proud of? Because you've done so much. If there's one thing that you can turn around and that your grandkids will Google you and search and find, what will they see that you turn around and say, I left that behind, I did that?
Geez, it's a really difficult question to answer, and I don't have a profound answer. I mean, honest to goodness, I think I'd just like to be remembered as a decent fella who tried hard to do the right thing. And if I could achieve that, that would mean more to me than anything else. The rest of it is, you can write it down on a piece of paper and people can look at it and say, oh, that's good, bad, indifferent. But at the end of the day, I said before, Beau, and you and I have talked about it, it really is all about people, and that's what I am. I'm people, and I'd like to be remembered, if possible, as someone who was a decent person who tried to do the right thing and make a contribution. And if I achieve that, that'll be fantastic.